If you like the Tim Black Show, subscribe. All right, let's go, guys. So that's what today. Today's testimony today centered around George Floyd's drug use. We already know he used drugs because his girlfriend got on the stand and said they both were addicted to opiates. Not a shocker. It's also kind of funny. I haven't heard these people talking about George Floyd's the trial until today. Now, they didn't talk about it yesterday when the chief of police said that the excessive force was used. No, yesterday was all the other cops. Yesterday was wall-to-wall police officers all saying this was excessive force, it was unnecessary force, Chauvin's an asshole. The day before that, so I didn't hear from the conservatives. Not a word. Because it didn't fit their narrative. The day before that, when the chief, Monday, when the chief of police said excessive force, this is not how we conduct business, and threw Chauvin under the bus, I did not see a single one of these people online. They were quiet, Johnson. But today, because it was said that George Floyd uses drugs, then they show up. It's just sometimes I like a little justice in our justice. I like a little honesty in reporting. Like I said, hey man, a lie and a false narrative is not a different opinion. It's a lie and it's a false narrative. That's not just we see things differently. No, you're a liar. Because you know that the medical examiner said it wasn't drug overdose. You know what asphyxia is. You know two things can exist. You can have weed in your system and get struck by lightning. Those two things can happen at the same time. There are some people here who have runners who may have, alcohol in their system. And if you fell down the steps and fell the wrong way, Johnson, I don't wish that on anybody, or slipped in the tub tonight, the fall would be the thing that kills you. If you land wrong, not the alcohol. But these people, that's too much. We can't keep those things in our head at one time, though they are very logical and easily to decipher. So obviously I'm pissed off because these people are the people with the huge platforms. Because for some reason, the right rallies around them. The right upholds them, hoists them up. And me, with the counter narrative, who spent hours upon hours. Today, I spent 6 hours combing through footage. I don't get the support of my peers. But then people get mad when I don't support my peers. My peers don't support me. I'm the counter argument to all of these conservatives lying their asses off. And what support do I get? Zero. That's how I feel. That's very disconcerting to say the least, Johnson. But fuck it. Here we go. We pick up today's testimony starts off where yesterday's left off. If you do recall, we had an officer. He's a sergeant from the Los Angeles Police Department. His name is Sergeant Steiger. He was testifying to the excessive use of force, or force that was used. He trains officers in how to use force, how to conduct force. That's his job. That's what he does. They flew him in from Los Angeles as an unbiased arbiter of these events to testify as state's witness. The first clip we're going to go to is this officer who doesn't know George Floyd, who's not paid by lefties, who's not sent out to lie to you, who didn't vote against Trump that I know of. These are all the narratives they have to build up in order to lie to their people. He's going to talk to you about positional asphyxia and how it can occur. Let's go.
28 up just for the witness to refresh her recollection. No, sir, but you do acknowledge that it would be possible for a loud group to... Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion was that no force should have been used once he was in that position.
I see on this continuum that phrase deadly force. Is deadly force defined?
Yes.
Is it defined in Minneapolis Police Departmental policy?
Yes, it is.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 216, and if you could move to page 2, calling out the definition of deadly force. And, sir, could you read into the record for the jury what the definition of deadly force is, beginning at force which the actor uses?
Yes. Force which the actor uses with the purpose of causing or which the actor should reasonably know creates a substantial risk of causing death of great bodily harm.
I'd like to now republish Exhibit 254, the composite. And this is the force applied. I'm going to ask you, sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty whether the force used, as shown in Exhibit 254, whether that force being applied then for the restraint period, which you've defined as 9 minutes and 29 seconds, would constitute deadly force?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That it would.
Why is that?
Because at the time of the restraint period, Mr. Floyd was not resisting. He was in the prone position. He was handcuffed. He was not attempting to evade. He was not attempting to resist. And the pressure that was being caused by the body weight could cause positional asphyxia, which could cause death.
Is positional asphyxia a known risk in law enforcement?
Yes, it is.
How long have the dangers of positional asphyxia been known?
At least 20 years. I can recall a Department of Justice memo from, I believe, 1995 that discussed it, and I know that I was trained on it in 1995 as well.
And the risk or the danger of positional asphyxia, the worst outcome is death, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Recap. All right. So, Sergeant Steiger of the Los Angeles Police Department clearly states there that positional asphyxia can occur. Depending on how you position a person, it can cause serious damage or even death. Not only is positional asphyxia dangerous, when you are applying pressure to someone, you can cause positional asphyxia just by having someone in that position. That's why it's called positional asphyxia. So basically this, Johnson, the way they had George Floyd in the prone position with his arms behind his back, laying on his stomach, could have killed him by itself. Not instantaneously, but over time. I'm wondering why these people aren't talking about this. Why is that not being discussed? It's evidence. It's science. It's in the training. Weird enough, isn't it? All right. The next clip is going to talk about bystanders because for some strange reason, the defense keeps contending that it was the 12 people standing on the side of the street talking that made it so that Chauvin couldn't pay attention to George Floyd. For some reason, he was so distracted by someone with a camera because he'd never seen phones before. Apparently, Derek Chauvin had never seen a cell phone, a smartphone before. And he was so distracted that he was being filmed that he could not pay attention to his suspect, who, by the way, had not been read his Miranda rights yet, had not even been arrested yet. He's being detained. He damn sure hasn't been convicted of anything. So he's innocent until proven guilty, right? Okay, so let's go to clip 8. Let's go to the next clip.
Aware that there was a group of bystanders who eventually began to watch the defendant and the other officers use force on Mr. Floyd.
Yes.
Now, sir, in your experience with the Los Angeles Police Department and in the areas you were patrolling, have you ever had to use force or apply force or handcuff a suspect in the view of bystanders?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had to handcuff an unwilling suspect or subject in the view of bystanders?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had to do so in the presence of a hostile crowd?
Yes, sir.
Could you define a hostile crowd in that context?
I would define hostile crowd in the situations I've been in where the crowd or members of the crowd were threatening and or throwing bottles and rocks at us, at the police.
Have you had that experience?
Yes, sir.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
Okay. So if I could publish Exhibit 184, getting back to the circumstances of this case, this appeared to be the bystanders that were gathered watching the defendant apply force to Mr. Floyd.
Yes, it does.
When you reviewed the body-worn cameras, did you see anybody throw any rocks or bottles?
No, I did not.
Did you see anyone physically attack the officers?
No, I did not.
Did you hear foul language or name-calling?
There was some name calling, yes, but and some foul language, but that was about the most of it.
Did that factor into your analysis?
No.
Why not?
Because I did not perceive them as being a threat.
And why is that?
Because they were merely filming, and most of it was their concern for Mr. Floyd.
And in terms of proportionality in the force continuum, is the officer able to increase the use of force on an individual based on the conduct of some third party over whom the subject has no control?
No, the officers can only use force based on the subject's actions.
Do you acknowledge that loud noise and name calling can in fact be distracting?
Yes, it can be.
What does an experienced and trained officer do in the face of that sort of distraction?
They continue to assess and reassess their force, or they would attempt to lower any type of threat level that they may perceive.
Now, based on your review of the offense materials and the records, as of May 25, 2020, how long had the defendant been a Minneapolis police officer?
Approximately 19 years.
And if we can call out, publish Exhibit 203, and if you could highlight the top portion. These appear to be workforce training records of the defendant, is that right?
Yes.
And it indicates approximately 866 hours
Yes.
of paid training.
Yes.
Do you think that should have been sufficient training to prepare the defendant for this distraction?
Absolutely.
All right. Wow. Anybody was here last night, you may recall me saying one of the things that I've discovered during my coverage of this trial is that police get a lot of training. They get a lot of training, Johnson. 866 hours of training is what former officer Derek Chauvin received. Because we like to say, these cops aren't trained. That's why they keep doing this thing. It must be training. We need to come to grips that we have cops that don't give a damn. Yeah. You can know what to do and just not do it. To assume that these officers don't know what they're doing is to give them too much credit. Hey, you give them too much credit, Johnson. We got to stop doing that as a community. We got to stop saying that knee-jerk response because we heard somebody else say it. Hey, man, they need more training. We need to keep training these cops. No, it's sort of like our system. It ain't broke. It's working as it was designed, Johnson. It's working the way they want it to work. So let's cut the shit with the cops need to be trained more. If after 862 or whatever that was, hours of training, you still don't get it, let's just admit you don't want to get it. Bystanders, hostile crowd. Hey guys, it sounded to me like Sergeant Steiger was calling Derek Chauvin a BI. Yeah, he's calling him a BI because he said, hey man, I've dealt with hostile crowds throwing bottles and rocks and still did my damn job. Chauvin could not deal with people holding up a phone like this and saying things like, hey, don't kill a guy. Hey, he can't breathe. Let him breathe. Hey, get off him. You're killing a guy. That for Chauvin, the defense argues, and by extension, all these assholes online are arguing that Chauvin couldn't deal with that. That's too much. And they call people on the left snowflakes. The next clip will be Sergeant Steiger talking about distractions and what a distraction is. Because we already defined what really hostile is. A hostile crowd is actually people trying to attack you, actually throwing things at you, actually interfering with your job. Saying something and filming from afar is not interfering with your job, and it's protected under the First Amendment. Let's continue, folks.
Now, sir, but you do acknowledge that it would be possible for a loud group, to distract a defendant from being attentive to George Floyd. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you believe that occurred?
No, I do not.
Why is that?
Because in the body-worn video, you can hear Mr. Floyd displaying his discomfort and pain, and you can also hear the defendant responding to him.
Now, at this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 47 and bring us to the body. That's the body-worn camera footage of Lane. Bring us to the point of 20, 22, and 23 seconds. Okay. And at this time, I'd like to publish that and play that section for the jury.
My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. There's water or something. Please. Please. I can't breathe, officer.
Stop talking, stop
They
yelling.
will kill me. They will kill me, man.
Takes a heck of a lot of oxygen.
Come on, man.
All right. Is that the exchange that you testified to of the defendant responding to statements of Mr. Floyd?
Yes, sir.
And sir, approximately how long did the defendant continue to restrain George Floyd after the exchange we just heard?
I believe 6 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Yep. What up? So here, folks, the prosecutor was being more than charitable, I believe. Yeah, he was being nice. He's like, okay, maybe to some of the juries who are cupcakes, they may think, oh man, people talking loudly at a police officer from a distance is really distracting for police officers who are trained basically like military personnel. But okay, maybe some people would be distracted. Proof that he wasn't distracted was the fact that he was talking to George Floyd just fine. He could hear George Floyd and even mocked him as he complained of his vital organs starting to shut down. Yeah, he was so distracted, he carried on a conversation with him. Kind of goes against the whole myth that you were so distracted you couldn't pay attention if you're talking to a guy. And also, I heard that loud and clear over the voices of the bystanders who were on the sidewalk or wherever. So I think that was pretty good testimony of what happened, or at least how this detective saw it. Now I got to take it to the part I really don't like, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm not like my adversaries. I'm not like those people that I disagree with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play you some of the defense, which I've done on several nights. Because I'm not going to, I want you to have a full view of the case. I don't work for Benjamin Crump or, or family members of George Floyd. I'm here to get to the truth. And the truth as I see it is how I've been portraying it in my commentary. George Floyd was killed by asphyxiation, which I believe would not have occurred without Derek Chauvin applying that pressure to his neck. But here goes the defense talking about how threatening Floyd was, even in handcuffs. Because he a big black man.
Now, you have testified, as I understand your testimony, that that the officers putting Mr. Floyd into the prone position was initially a reasonable use of force, right?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the swarm technique?
Yes.
Where multiple officers are on top of a resisting suspect trying to control the extremities, right?
Yes. Typically that's done prior to handcuffing.
But that's once someone is handcuffed, right? And they're in the ground, a person who's in handcuffs can continue to be a threat. Agreed?
Yes.
They can kick you.
Correct.
Right? They could bite you.
Correct.
They could thrash and get free and start running, right?
In certain instances, yes.
Right. And in certain instances, they can even get your weapon, right?
Yes.
They could get your gun from you, even though they're handcuffed.
Yes.
So the notion that a handcuffed suspect no longer presents a threat to an officer is not correct.
It depends on the circumstances.
Right. A handcuffed suspect can continue to present a risk.
Based on that person's actions, yes.
Right. And so once you're have a suspect in the prone position and they continue to kick, it may require more force than if they were compliant, right?
Yes. That's why we have devices like the hobble.
Right. Now, initially during this instance, you would agree that Mr. Floyd continued to make certain protestations about his inability to breathe, right?
Yes.
And he was saying lots of other things like that he was in pain and that he was hurting, correct?
Correct.
And an officer, a reasonable officer, they need to communicate with each other, right?
Yes.
A reasonable officer is going to rely on information that his fellow officer tells him, right?
Yes.
A reasonable officer, again, is going to take into consideration what the suspect is saying, right?
Yes.
And compare that against the actions, right?
Yes.
Man, I find that hard to listen to. Oh, man, I find it hard to listen to. I know he's just doing his job, but his job sucks. There was a movie called Hollywood Shuffle where they said there's always work at the post office. Damn it. If you're a lawyer and you have to go up there and make up false narratives like that, you should go work at the post office instead. All this what-if bullshit. What if George Floyd grew wings? How would the officer not know he couldn't grow wings and fly into the air and spit fire out and burn all the cops up? That could happen because he's a big black guy. That is the racial connotation to his argument. We're too racist a country for that white son of a bitch to sit up there and make that allegation that what if George did this? What if George showed no signs and actions of doing any of these things? Well, he could bite the officer. Oh, did he bite the officer? No, but he could have. Yeah. And I could be a figure skater, but I'm not, motherfucker. I'm Tim Black and I'm sitting here. I'm a little overweight and a little past that time. But that's the narrative. That's why I say it's all garbage. Doubt is about lying to you and saying, well, this is possible. Maybe he had to kill him because if he didn't, George Floyd at any second could have picked him up and picked the cars up and onga, bonga, bonga, onga, bonga, bonga, oh, blah, blah, blah. Because, you know, he's a big black guy. And as a big black guy, as a big black man who's been a big black man for as long as I've been a man, I'm fucking tired of it. Smile more, Tim. People are afraid. Don't talk so stern, Tim. People are scared of you. Hey, Tim, I know this guy said a lot of shit about you, but you're not going to beat him up, are you? That's for people on the left. So it's all racist-ass tropes. Do you think he would be saying that if we were talking about a 5'10" white guy? I don't think he would, Johnson. The problem is in America, that plays very well. Even if it's bullshit. Now, this is the funnest part of tonight. This will be where the narrative of the defense is to try to get George Floyd, is to get this officer to agree to something that's impossible to agree with. Let the tape show it.
I'd like to publish part of the body-worn camera. It's Officer King's body-worn camera starting at 2021-01.
This is a portion of what's already been received.
Yes.
Any objection?
No objection.
I'd like you to see if you can tell me what Mr. Floyd says in this instance.
I hate you, Mercedes. Please. I hate you, Mercedes. Please.
You hear what he said?
No, I couldn't make it out.
Does it sound like he says, I ate too many drugs? Listen again.
I hate you, Mercedes. Please.
I can't make that out, no.
So in the chaos of a situation, things can be missed, right?
Yes.
You would agree that at one point during the exchange, Mr. Floyd was advised that he was under arrest, right?
Yes.
In fact, that happened a couple of times, right?
Yes.
Now, at the point they have Mr. Floyd on the ground, you would agree and you're aware that officers called for EMS, right?
Yes.
It's reasonable for an officer to call EMS, right?
Yes.
If there is an injury, right? Or some need,
Or a complaint of injury or some discomfort or medical emergency, yes.
And you understand that in this particular instance, very shortly after Mr. Floyd was on the ground, officers called for EMS.
Yes.
They called for
initially for his injury to his head.
to his face or mouth
Yes.
injury, right? And they called it they called EMS in a non-emergent situation, right?
Correct.
And that happened at 8:19 and 49 seconds. Code 2 EMS for a mouth injury, right?
Yes.
And this occurred at the point when officers were discussing whether or not to use the hobble restraint on Mr. Floyd, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, officers did not use the hobble restraint, right?
Correct.
A hobble restraint would generally require officers to consider calling EMS, right? According to Minneapolis Police Department policy.
According to Minneapolis Police Department.
And may be different in other jurisdictions, right?
Correct.
So as officers are discussing and ultimately they decide, you agree, that they decide not to use the hobble device.
Yes, they did not use the hobble device.
And we talked a little bit earlier about the de-escalation component of things,
Yes.
right? A decision to use or to not use a higher form of force that you may have been authorized to use can actually be a de-escalation technique. Agreed?
In certain instances, yes.
Right. So officers making a decision not to increase the level of force can be viewed as a de-escalation technique.
Yes.
Now, again, we've talked a lot about the need for reassessment and kind of things as they reassessment, and officers need to continue to
Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable professional certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion was that no force should have been used once he was in that position.
I see on this continuum that phrase deadly force. Is deadly force defined?
Yes.
Is it defined in Minneapolis Police Departmental policy?
Yes, it is.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 216, and if you could move to page 2.
That portion of it, I was trying to figure out where he was going with that, where the defense was going with that particular line of thought, because I couldn't make out what was said. But I know what the defense had put in my head that was said. Get what I'm saying? So I said, is this psychology? Is he trying to work a Jedi mind trick on the jury? Because I couldn't tell what was said. So let's go to the next clip where Officer Ryerson's going to be asked about the same issues. Check this out.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant Steiger, where we left off, I think we were talking about how bystanders began to congregate around the event, right?
I believe so, yes.
And you would agree that over the course of time, some of the bystanders who were observing the event became more excited.
More concerned, I would phrase it.
Their voices grew louder.
Yes.
They began name calling, essentially.
Correct.
And as that increased, or as the time went on, the intensity of the crowd increased.
Yes, they became more concerned.
Now, we looked at, I'm going to talk about Exhibit 110, if we could publish 110. So this again being what some people would call the use of force continuum, or what the Minneapolis Police Department calls the Defense and Control Response Training Guide, correct?
Yes.
Essentially, this is a graphic illustration in terms of, based upon a subject's behavior, how much force is authorized, correct?
Correct.
The onus or the focus being on the suspect's behavior initially, correct?
Correct.
And the response to that behavior, right?
Correct.
Now, again, we don't look at a use of force in a vacuum, right?
No, we do not.
We don't look at it, more situationally aware of everything that's happening around him or her than an average bystander, right?
Yes.
You'd expect that.
Usually that comes with training, experience, and tenure.
Let's see, please. And if you feel comfortable doing so, take off your mask. Let's start with you giving your full name, spelling each of your names.
James, James, Ryerson, Reyerson.
Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you tell us what your current occupation is?
I'm currently a senior special agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
So just in general, what does a senior special agent do? What does your job entail?
So I'm currently assigned to the newly formed use of force investigation group. We conduct criminal investigations into uses of force incidents.
Are you a licensed peace officer?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, you're not wearing what we typically think of as a police uniform. Is that...
Sir, do
when
you have an
work, do you
opinion
have
to a
uniform?
degree of reasonable,
generally
professional
not.
certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable, professional certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion was that no force should have been used once he was in that position.
I see on this continuum that phrase deadly force. Is deadly force defined?
Yes.
Is it defined in Minneapolis Police Departmental policy?
Yes, it is.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 216, and if you could move to page 2, calling out the definition of deadly force. And, sir, could you read into the record for the jury what the definition of deadly force is, beginning at force which the actor uses?
Yes. Force which the actor uses with the purpose of causing, or which the actor should reasonably know creates a substantial risk of causing death of great bodily harm.
Guys, this is getting a little confusing. My bad. There's just so much going on. This is not, okay, so let me take this out. I got like 15 clips going at one time. Hold on a second. Let's go back here. Yeah, like 15 things. It's just so many clips, and it's, the prosecution, then it's the defense, and then sometimes the prosecution recalls a witness, so it's getting a little confusing. But we know what the allegation was, that George Floyd said something about drugs in the system. And we know that Sergeant Steiger could not hear it. This is the clip I wanted to go to. It's marked for me 8.9. That's 8th day, 9th clip. And this is James Ryerson, who's a special agent at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minneapolis. That's the setup. Let's go to that clip.
Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reason?
All right, sorry, it is the right exhibit, Exhibit 127, and I have it at 20, 28, and 32. So I'm going to ask you again, sir, to just watch the left arm of Mr. Floyd on the left side of the screen.
On the left side, okay. So are you referring to the body-worn camera side or the
Body-worn camera side.
Okay.
Yes, please. Did you observe Mr. Floyd's left arm on the ground underneath Mr. Chauvin's right knee?
I believe I did, yes.
And when Mr. Chauvin stood up, Mr. Floyd's arm sort of came up, right?
Can I see that again, please?
Sure. I'm going to just hit back 10 seconds and start. It's hard because of this bar. Let's try one more time. And
I have kind of a glare as well.
Pardon?
You can stand
Can you see that?
So what was the question? Repeat the question, please.
Do you observe Mr. Chauvin's right knee to be compressing Mr. Floyd's left arm?
So clarification, I think from what I see here, it was Mr. Chauvin's shin that was compressed in the arm, and the knee was actually on the back.
That's what you believe you see?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And, but nevertheless, Mr. Floyd's left arm, the tricep area, was in between Mr. Chauvin's either knee or shin, right?
Yes.
Did you review and study the body-worn cameras like very closely yourself?
I've seen all of them. I've reviewed most of them closely, yes.
Okay. And did you attempt to understand and hear what various parties were saying at various times?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Mr. Floyd say, "I ate too many drugs"?
No.
Like to publish Exhibit 1007, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, "I ate too many drugs"?
Yes, it did.
In the videos that we watched, both on direct examination and we've seen throughout the course of this case, there appears to be a liquid forming underneath the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And that liquid stream goes out into the street towards the curb behind the back of the squad car, correct?
That's correct.
And it's fair to say that liquid coming from underneath the vehicle appears to be coming from underneath the vehicle, correct?
That is correct.
And depending upon your perspective, correct, that that appears that could have been urine coming from the body of Mr. Floyd.
Yes, sir.
But we can see, based on this, that was actually probably condensation from the running squad car, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's common when a squad car is running, air conditioning or whatnot, right? Condensation drips from the bottom of the muffler or exhaust system.
Yes.
Yes, condensation does drip or can drip from beneath a vehicle that's running an AC. It's also true that lies drip from your lying-ass mouth. I didn't hear. That's not what I heard George Floyd say. I'm not sure what George Floyd said. But I bet with headphones on, in that room, I could probably hear it a lot better. So the next clip will be the prosecution letting him hear it again. And this is what the conservatives that I've been seeing online and the people that the Blue Lives Matter folks, and let's just call them Blue Lives Matter folks. These people who side with the cops no matter what happens. Children die, people get shot, killed, without weapons, choked out, dead, and they still support the cops regardless. Because every cop is good to them, no matter what the cop did. Even a cop with 19 prior incidents of or charges of alleged police brutality, like Derek Chauvin. They still stand behind him. Here goes that clip. Here goes the clip of the officer taking another bite at the apple.
Agent Ryerson was asked about 2030 through 2021-01, where that phrase appears that Mr. Ryerson, Agent Ryerson, was asked about.
Please understand. No. Please, man, I can't breathe.
Get up on the sidewalk, please. One side or the other, please.
My face getting up bad.
Here, should we get his legs up?
Oh, that's all right.
Nope, just leave him.
Oh,
Just
my
leave him.
God.
Just leave him. Yep, just leave him.
All right.
I'm dead.
The park's still sitting on the car there.
Look at my face, man.
I'm assuming so.
I believe so. We found a pipe on
Get
him.
out of the car.
I ain't too much
Mercedes?
Please,
Yeah,
Across
the
the street, park's watching.
please,
Two other people with
please,
him.
I can't breathe.
So the record should reflect that we've played through 2021-10 with the quote that you were asked about appearing really at 2021-01, correct?
Yes.
Having heard it in context, are you able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there?
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, I ain't doing no drugs.
So it's a little different than what you were asked about when you only saw a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then to clarify what we did earlier, it would appear that I had inverted a couple of the exhibit numbers, correct?
Yes.
We now straightened that out. Exhibits 53 and 54 are both parts of the Dragon Walk video. You have seen those, and they are, in fact, what was obtained from the Dragon Walk, correct?
Correct.
And also Exhibit 55, is that a portion of the Dragon Walk video as well?
Yes.
And so, Your Honor, just to be clear, what we had initially offered as Exhibit 54 should actually be Exhibit 53. And we will, for clarity, offer Exhibits 53, 54, and 55.
Any objection to any of those? 53, 54, and 55 are received.
I don't intend to publish them at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything that was not received is received, and go ahead and publish. Which one are you going to publish?
We are not going to publish them.
Not going to. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I ain't do no drugs. I have it's difficult for me to tell you exactly what was said. I'm not going to speculate, but I can't really make it out either way. And I'm wondering why we're stuck on this point, but I think the people that want to support Derek Chauvin want this to be George Floyd's smoking gun, so to speak, because we know he didn't have a gun. Now, he wasn't a threat in that way. But they want this to be the smoking gun, is that he said something about doing drugs. We've already clearly stated that he was a drug user, and so I don't get it. The medical examiner said he died of asphyxiation. So what? But this is the way that they lie. This is the way they don't want it to be the thing that the medical examiner and the paramedics said. They've dealt with overdoses before. They know what those people look like. They know the symptoms of an overdose person. They know the symptoms of somebody who was asphyxiated. That George Floyd is not the first person to whoever died of asphyxiation. Nor is he the first person that these paramedics or the medical examiner has ever seen. So, once again, this is all BS in order to create a narrative that some people gobble up because they want to confirm their biases. They want somebody to tell them to go ahead and believe what they believe, even if what they believe is a damn lie, Johnson. And it is a lie. If I thought that George Floyd had an overdose and that's all we were dealing with, that would be it. Now, the part about I want to add this part. The part about the fluid running from the vehicle that the prosecutor brought up earlier, defense brought up earlier, that's true. Some people did think that was George Floyd with some body fluids on the ground. But it makes sense that would be something from the vehicle. I think I already mentioned that, but just in case. All right, so my next clip is going to be Ryerson one more time. We got a couple other witnesses. This witness, Mr. Ryerson, is going to talk about, does anybody remember the guy that was with George Floyd in the passenger seat? We're going to talk a little bit about him, which is important.
And Agent Ryerson, I'm going to ask you to watch the area of the vehicles and the passengers in the vehicles.
Yes, sir.
Were you able to see?
Yes, sir.
What does it appear that individual does?
The individual in the red hat you're referring to?
Yes.
Appears as though he throws something.
So he's looking initially through the passenger or through the vehicle, looking in the area of the police officers, correct?
Appeared that way.
It appears that he then reaches into his backpack and retrieves something,
Yes.
and it appears that he then throws it off to his right shoulder, right?
That's correct.
And it appeared to go some distance away.
Yes, sir.
Would that be consistent with someone trying to get rid of something that they don't want the police to find?
Could be, yes.
I have no further questions.
Anything further? All right. Thank you, Agent. You are excused from your subpoena.
So I wish they would have showed us that tape because I hadn't seen that tape. But apparently on that footage, there is the gentleman that was with George Floyd threw something out of the vehicle. I don't know why that's important. You didn't arrest him. You arrested George Floyd. You let the drug dealer go and took down the guy for $20. Crack police work. Excellent work here. The drug dealer goes home safe and sound. The guy with the $20 counterfeit bill is dead. And for some reason, people are applauding that. The guy with the illness of drug addiction, the guy dealing with drug addiction, is the bad guy. And the guy who gets people on drugs, sells them drugs and profits from it illegally. Because we know, America, we sell drugs all the time. America sells drugs like this drug sells on every block. It's called pharmacies, right? Just his are illegal. And most people on opiates or fentanyl or heroin were prescribed it initially. So, Oxycontin and what have you, right? But we're not going to get into that. What I'm saying is, these people that hate drugs, even weed, who complain about marijuana being wacky, reefer madness, are plotting, are really supportive of Derek Chauvin and these other cops killing the guy who wasn't a drug dealer. Just thought I'd throw that out there just to add a little context to why I'm having such a pissed off day. My next clip will be Mackenzie Anderson, a forensic scientist, Minneapolis Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. She's going to talk about something she found in the vehicle. Full disclosure here, guys. We don't lie on this channel.
By Special Agent Ryerson that the vehicle, the squad, was being towed back to BCA headquarters. They had met, some of our agents had met with defense attorneys on the case who had gone through the squad, and there was an additional request for evidence collection after that.
And that specifically was for this pill or other pill-like items in the vehicle?
Yes.
And so did you in fact then process the squad car a second time with that in mind?
Yes.
And have you seen exhibits 170 through 176?
I have.
And are those taken from the processing of that vehicle?
Yes.
Your Honor, to offer 170 to 176.
No objection.
170 through 176 inclusive are received.
I'm going to show you now exhibit 170. When you began to process that vehicle, was it still sealed up from the initial processing?
It was not sealed up when it arrived at the garage.
Because others had already been in to look for this.
Correct, that was my understanding.
And so we're seeing in exhibit 170, this back seat area, the pill appears to be present there as well, correct?
Yes, the pill is in the position it was on May 27th.
All right, and let's go to exhibit 171. And did you assign this an item number?
Yes, I assigned it BCA item 51.
And did you then recover that item?
I did.
Can you describe describe its condition for the jury?
The pill was round in shape, however, it had a rough textured appearance to it, and there were no visible markings on this particular pill.
Did it appear like it wasn't whole any longer?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement, yes.
And then if we can go to 172, please. So this is a close-up of that item.
Yes, it is.
And so then you collected that, and did you make that available for further testing in the lab?
I did.
And we'll come back to that in a minute too. Exhibit 173, can you describe what's depicted in that photograph?
In this photograph, you can see an item that has been marked as item 52, and that is the rear driver's side of the squad car.
And can you describe for the jurors, well, let's move on to 174, and then describe for the jurors what item 52 is.
This is a closer photograph of item 52. It was a small, irregular shaped piece that could have been a portion of a pill. It had that same kind of rough textured appearance as item 51. There was no visible markings on this particular item either.
Was that collected for testing as well?
It was.
Okay. So, Mackenzie Anderson, she testified that initially when they processed the vehicle, they searched the vehicle that George Floyd was in temporarily when they made the arrest. You know, before they took him in the vehicle, then he was outside the vehicle. That's when they laid on top of him. Originally, when they searched the vehicle, they found nothing. Then the defense said, hey, search it again. Then they searched it again and they found pills in it. Just saying. First time, no pills. Second time, they found pills. Now, you can theorize how that happened. Oh, and also the vehicle wasn't sealed after the first time they searched it. So, like, when they searched it the first time, they didn't seal it and lock it up. That's what she just testified. They didn't think they'd have to look at it again, so whatever, right? Now let's go back to it because something else was found with the pills.
Known sample, what did you find?
From item 51, that the swab collected from that pill, I obtained a single source male DNA profile that matches George Floyd. This DNA profile would not be expected to occur more than once among unrelated individuals in the world population.
So after you did your testing in item 51, did you make it available for other sections of the lab?
Yes, it was sent to drug chemistry after I was done.
That's right, the pills that suddenly appeared in the vehicle that was previously searched that had no pills, now not only has pills in it, but it also has George Floyd's DNA on the pill. This appeared. The next witness will be Brianna Giles, another forensic scientist. She's going to testify about what was in the pills.
Putting it into a liquid, and that liquid is then injected onto a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, or GCMS.
Now you indicated that the markings on the pills indicated, I'm going to butcher it if I try it, but that they contained what?
Oxycodone and acetaminophen.
Now, in your experience and your training in this field, do you know whether sometimes homemade pills are given those same markings to make them look legitimate?
Yes.
That can happen?
Yes.
And so in this case, you got that initial indication from the markings, but you proceeded to follow through with the testing, correct?
Yes.
And you tested both of those pills, correct?
Yes.
And did you follow all the standard procedures you need to do when performing that kind of testing for your laboratory?
Yes.
And what were the results of the testing?
The tablets contained methamphetamine and fentanyl.
And are you able at the BCA lab to quantify how much methamphetamine or fentanyl are in those pills?
For methamphetamine, yes. For fentanyl, no.
And so were you asked to do some additional testing with other items in this case?
Yes.
And were those items 51, 52, and 53?
Yes.
All right, so let's look at item 51 first. That item, can you describe for the jurors the condition of that item when you saw it?
It appeared to be a partial white and pink tablet with no observable markings.
And did you then test that item as well?
Yes.
And again, cut a portion of it off for the testing?
Yes.
And did you follow the necessary procedures to conduct the testing on that item as well?
Yes.
And what were the results of that testing?
Methamphetamine.
And were you able to detect any other controlled substances in that pill through that testing?
Not conclusively.
And what do you mean by that?
Per our policies and our procedures, there are certain requirements that we have to conclusively identify a substance. Methamphetamine was the only substance that was identified.
All right, Johnson. Okay, our last and final witness is Susan Neath. Susan Neath. She's a forensic chemist. She works at the lab. She did a breakdown analysis of the pills as to what the meth and fentanyl components were in quantifiable analysis. So she'll tell you how much drug was in the drugs.
.628 up just for the witness to refresh her recollection. And seeing your report, does that refresh your recollection with respect to your findings?
Yes.
And this continues on from page 1 to page 2, so just focusing in on the first part of your findings. What did you find with respect to BCA item 48?
In both of those cases, the fentanyl concentration was less than 1%. For the NMS Exhibit 1, which was the first tablet of item 48, the methamphetamine was 1.9%, and again, fentanyl less than 1%. For NMS item 2, or the second tablet in item 48, the fentanyl was less than 1%, and the methamphetamine was 2%.
And then with respect to BCA item 51, what were your findings with respect to BCA item 51?
Fentanyl was less than 1%, and methamphetamine purity was 2.9%.
And with respect to fentanyl, is that amount, well, how does that amount, this less than 1% amount, compare to what you would expect to see for street fentanyl in your experience?
In my personal experience, when I've quantitated fentanyl in powders or tablets, generally we see levels that are low and less than 1%, or maybe slightly above 1%.
So having a level under 1% with respect to fentanyl purity is common, and sometimes it may be slightly higher. Is that your experience?
In my experience, yes.
And with respect to the amounts of methamphetamine, ranging from 1.9% through 2.9% purity, how does that compare to what you typically see in your line of work for street or recreational methamphetamine?
That result is low. Generally, we see higher levels in methamphetamine samples that I have tested.
And when you say higher levels, approximately what percentages of purity do you typically look at for street methamphetamine?
Majority of the time I see 90 to 100% methamphetamine.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson?
No question.
All right, thank you.
All right. I don't know enough about drug percentages, but according to Mrs. Neath, one lot of meth in the meth. Do with that as you will. No one's arguing whether George Floyd used drugs. No one's arguing that. But 4 medical examiners have testified that George Floyd died of asphyxia, including the chief medical examiner who signed his death certificate, who signed him deceased. Guess it's not enough, though. That's not enough because we got to believe our lying eyes to what we saw. So we got Sergeant Jody Steiger saying the force was excessive, that the position that George Floyd was in could kill a man, and they've all been trained to know that. And that former officer Derek Chauvin, being almost an officer for 20 years, should know that. Also testifying that the distraction of the crowd was no distraction. Not really. because he could talk to the officer and we could talk to George Floyd and respond to George Floyd's commands or questions, I should say, and mock him as he died just fine. So we're paying enough attention to George Floyd over the sounds of a crowd begging for George Floyd's life to make fun of George Floyd. So that kind of doesn't help his case. No force should have been used. He was handcuffed and in a prone position. Why you need to use force? What other force needs to be used? And being in a prone position handcuffed is already force. Also, he testified that force needs to be assessed and reassessed throughout the encounter with a citizen. So what's maybe required to get someone under control is not what you do for the entire duration of the time. Once they're under control, you lessen the degree. And you don't get to abuse someone because you think that they might bite you, but they haven't tried to bite you. Or they may do something crazy. If they haven't done it, you can't just treat them as if they're going to do that if they haven't done that. At least that's not what the training is. And we already know Derek Chauvin was not skimped out on training. He had over 800 hours of training. They get trained every year because being a cop is a certification requiring you to recertify by going through training every year. What else? Ryerson. Toxicology report they found methamphetamine and fentanyl in Floyd's system. That's what the defense is going to argue. Prosecution's arguing what the medical examiner has argued or stated in the reports. So here we are. The closing out is that there were drugs in the car. Suddenly they appeared where there were no drugs before. After the vehicle sat in the lot back at the station for about a month. There it is, Johnson. Actually, more than a month, because the request to take a second look at the vehicle was made in January. This happened May 26th. Was it May? No, March. March 26th, right? March 26th or 25th. Someone knows in the comment section. So in the comment section, guys, what do you think? What do you think we got? We got ourselves a real trial here? Is this worth our time to pay attention to this? Let me know in the comment section. I think we have Minneapolis Police Department throwing Chauvin under the bus. And I think he deserves to be thrown under the bus. I think he's a bad cop who killed a man. The sticking point for me, guys, is going to be, did he intend to do it or not? He intended to sit on his neck. That's why he sat on his neck. That's why he continued to sit on his neck even after he was no longer conscious. You can't say a guy didn't intend to do something if he did it for 10 minutes. Now, you could do something for about 30 seconds and not intend to do it. But if you do something for 10 minutes, 9 minutes and 29 seconds, I think it's safe to say that's what you wanted to do. And all that other shit that people are throwing up against the wall doesn't matter. That's not what killed George Floyd. What killed George Floyd was Derek Chauvin and the other officers being complicit in what Derek Chauvin did. And they did not stop Derek Chauvin, nor did they try to. Actually, one officer did say, Derek, maybe we should put him in another position. Maybe we should let the pressure up. And Derek Chauvin was like, no, let's keep him the way he is. So, there you go, Johnson. That's it. Let me know in the comment section what you think. I'm going to go to Super Chat now. Read the comments from Super Chat. Facebook, YouTube, thank you for being here. If you like this content, if you find it refreshing or different or useful, subscribe to the channel. Now, if you really like it, become a member of the 10 Black Wolf Pack. Starting at only $5 a month. Can't hurt that. Hit like if you just like the show tonight and want to come back and try it out tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow. And then Friday, we open up phone lines. That's right. Tuesdays and Fridays, we take phone calls on this show. I'm not the only one that talks on my show. On my show, other people get to talk too. It's this thing called interaction. You know? It's a new year. Well, it's a new century. We use technology not just for people to dictate, but people talk back and forth all around the country. So it's good stuff. And outside the country. Some people call from other countries to talk to on the Tim Black Show. All right, guys. So we got a nice crowd of people. Hope that you stick around.
Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. Don't be fooled by corporate media talking heads misleading the people. Get your news and information from an entity that keeps it real. Tim Black. Tim Black is the host of The Tim Black Show. Independent news that leaves you informed, inspired, and sometimes entertained, but always in the know. Go to timblacktv.com and sign up today. The Tim Black Show is news for people who can't stand the news. See you there.